Well, let's get more reaction to, because joining us on the big screen here is Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation in the UK. Good to see you again, Mohammed. Just quickly, your reaction to the claim made by the Sri Lankan Defence Ministry that this attack in Sri Lanka was actually in retaliation to the attacks we saw on mosques in New Zealand a month ago.
Yeah.
OK. Mohammed, just one more time, I'm not sure if you can hear me. Just give us your reaction to the claim that these attacks in Sri Lanka were in retaliation for the attacks we saw in New Zealand a month ago.
Well, I reject that. I think it's inappropriate at this moment in time for there to be speculation about the circumstances and the reasons behind what we've seen. The first thing is there's an evil ideology of violence, of justification of violence behind these terrorists. Whether it's a mosque, whether it's a church, it's a synagogue or a temple, an attack against one faith is an attack against all. And I just said to the Sri Lankan government, there have been utter failings on your part, your intelligence agencies and your authorities to stop this terrorist attack before it happened. And rather than pointing the finger and cause more division, it's important to look at your own government and your own agencies and find out why the intelligence that was shared by international community wasn't acted upon. Because had they acted upon that, had their division within the Sri Lankan government between the president and the prime minister not have happened, then we could have actually seen lives being saved. And so I just don't think this is very good from the Sri Lankan government.
Do you think does it heighten the situation? Does it make the situation worse, do you think, by saying this? I mean, I don't know the Sri Lankan government sources for coming out and saying this, but presumably they're pretty good. But from your point of view, does it increase tensions in a country?
I think increased tensions around the world, Andrew. There is a real problem with political violence. Whether that comes from within the Muslim community or whether it comes from the far right, they've got something in common. They both have political aims and they want to use violence against innocent people. And so there is a real danger that we fall into the trap of what the terrorists set out to do, which is to divide communities. The Christian community was deliberately targeted on this occasion, as the Muslim community was in Christchurch, as the Jewish community was in a synagogue in America. So the threat from against people and people of faith and our places of worship is real. But I go back to this point, Andrew. The Sri Lankan government are culpable because when the international community provided credible intelligence, and they readily admit that that intelligence was provided to them, they didn't do anything. President didn't, and the head of the intelligence agencies did not share that with the government and the interior minister. And so that's an utter failure on the part of Sri Lanka. And I think this is an attempt to deflect attention away from its own failings.
What do you think the situation will be like now in Sri Lanka? I mean, we've talked to analysts prior to yourself too, saying that generally speaking, people are feeling pretty calm and hope that it won't revert back to the instability they saw a decade or so ago. What's your point of view?
Yeah, I really pray and hope that it doesn't go back to what happened over 10 years ago. You know, a civil war in which human life was no longer sacred. And I think it's great that Sri Lanka has had 10 years of relative peace. But, you know, what it shows is that there is no place on this earth that is safe from terrorism. And all of us, whatever our background, whatever our faith, and those of none, have got to stand united against that. I've been absolutely determined in the last 15 years as a grassroots campaigner to stand up against terrorism. And I'll continue to do that, as will many people in the Muslim, Christian and Jewish communities. And actually, we've got so much more in common. And let's not help the terrorists. Let's not allow violence, retaliation against the Muslim community, to be embedded within Sri Lankan society. In the end, I think you've seen a reaction in Sri Lanka, which is of communities coming together, and I think that's truly inspiring.
And what message would you like to see governments deliver then around the world about this latest terror attack?
One, we have this in our mindset just because ISIS and Daesh have been defeated in terms of territory in Syria, that somehow the threat from terrorism has disappeared or has gone down. It hasn't. We've still got a threat from Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and many other international terrorist organizations who want to cause havoc around the world. There are far-right extremism, which is on a huge rise, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but here in the UK and across Europe. And I think governments have a responsibility to use language that brings people together and, in a way, takes the threat of terrorism seriously. Because, as I said, the Sri Lankan government had credible intelligence. They readily accept that they had that intelligence, but didn't do anything with it. And I think that's a really dangerous point, that people look to the government to provide safety and security, and in that they utterly failed.
OK, Mohammed, look, we'll leave it there. That was Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation in the UK. Thank you.